You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. This is Forhad. I hope you are all well and safe. Needless to say, a lot is going on in the world. Regardless of what your stance is, I think everyone is going to appreciate today's discussion. As usual, we have a very special guest, Eric Reese. How are you today, Eric? Thank you so much for joining us.
Good. It's a pleasure to be with you today, Forhad. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, Eric and I, just for by way of background, Eric and I met during his tenure as assistant special agent in charge in the New York FBI office. I think that was from like 20 to 22, Eric. I
Yep.
was serving on the board of the FBI New York Citizens Academy, and we oftentimes ran into each other at different events and functions and things like that. Needless to say, our relationship has continued to evolve, and I am very excited to have you on the show. Perhaps you could start by providing a high level overview of your background for our audience.
Yeah, sure thing. So I spent 20 years in the bureau. I just retired last September. I finished out as a special agent in charge of counterintelligence and cyber at FBI New York. And I really consider myself a New Yorker, a professional New Yorker. I started out my time in the FBI in New York in a criminal job, and I moved around in the FBI quite a bit between headquarters and field offices and overseas. Spent I'm not I wouldn't say I was shoehorned into a particular program. I think you see a lot of folks that come up that have one specialty area, especially after 9/11, with a lot of our CT folks really concentrated and went deep on CT. I kind of consider myself a jack of all trades. I've had the opportunity to be in every one of the FBI's investigative programs. And prior to coming to the Bureau, I spent 11 years on active duty in the Navy as a flight officer, and flew EA-6B prowlers off of aircraft carriers. Spent a lot of time in the Middle East, um, uh, and throughout Southeast Asia.
And I guess and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Since leaving the bureau, you joined Strider Technologies, right?
Yeah, correct. I'm an executive vice president here at Strider Technologies now.
Excellent. Well, so let's, I guess, get warmed up by throwing you a couple of softballs here. Where did you grow up, and how did you become an FBI agent?
Yeah, so I grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania, public school kid. My father was a chief in the Navy, and he had been away serving and came back home right after I was born. And so I grew up in the same place in Northeast Pennsylvania. Again, went to public high school, and then got a appointment to the Naval Academy from Senator Specter at the time. And so I spent 4 years at the Naval Academy studying political science, and then I went on to be a naval aviator. And I spent most of my time on the West Coast between Washington State and San Diego. And I never there are folks that you run into that basically say, I knew since I was 10 years old that I wanted to be a pilot, or I knew that I wanted to be an FBI agent. I didn't really have that sort of background. I was always driven to do something because I thought the Navy was cool. My dad talked great things about it, and I saw all of his cruise books and kind of pictures of like Russian aircraft flying over the ship from back in the late '60s, early '70s. I thought it was really, really cool and impactful. And my grandfathers were both in the Army, and had a lot of older folks that had been in service in the Second World War in Korea. And so I wanted to. I thought that the military was cool. And it was a value, and I got a lot out of the academy, and so I really enjoyed my time as a officer in the Navy. And when I was leaving the Navy, when I decided that I didn't want to I saw the arc of my career and what I wanted to do, and it was going to be a lot of time away from home. And so I decided that I was going to transition out. And my brother-in-law, my now brother-in-law at the time, was a Secret Service agent. He said, "You really should consider federal law enforcement." And of course, he really kind of leaned into the Secret Service, but on the side, he took me aside and said, "Hey, look, the FBI is really the premier law enforcement agency in the world. You really need to take a shot at seeing if they're interested in you." So um, I had applied to a number of different law enforcement agencies, NCIS, I think ATF and DEA might have been in a hiring freeze or a hiring pause at the time. And I had a unusual experience because most people in my kind of era had a very difficult time cracking into something like the FBI because of the long time frame. And I had a really great experience with it. And it just seemed like every time I had another rung in the ladder, so to speak, in the hiring process, everything went very smoothly. And so I came on to the FBI in 2004. And yeah, like I said, I just retired last September and had a great career across the board in the Bureau. I don't have really a bad thing to say about it.
That's a great story. Just one question I'd have: would your brother-in-law remember that conversation the same way that the FBI was better than the Secret Service at the time?
Well, I don't know if I said better. I would just imply better. No, like, look, I mean, frankly, he said that he had again for a variety of different reasons, the had not progressed through the process the same way that I had. But look, I think that what you see with any 1811, any criminal investigator in the federal government that works for one of these agencies, like across the board, the agencies that we have here doing federal law enforcement intelligence in the United States are really setting the standard for our partners around the world and in the West. So I would have been, aside from the fact that it probably would have hurt my feet and back more, I would have been completely happy to serve my nation as a Secret Service agent as well.
That is a good answer, man. I gotta tell you. It's a good answer. Um, so our show is it's called Investigation Insiders, right? So what we try to do is we try to give our audience maybe a behind the scenes look at the work, the time, and all that sort of stuff. So do you have a memorable moment or moments that really stuck out during your career with the FBI that perhaps is not widely known or that you can share with us today?
Um, wow. I've had great experiences, I said, with the Bureau across the board. Some of which probably people will never have the ability to experience the same way I did, just because of timing and where I was in that particular part of my career. I started out as an organized crime investigator in New York City, and the first case I worked on was an Albanian, like, 26 defendant RICO case. Um, so you have folks that work in the FBI, like RICO, the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, is one of the kind of hallmarks about what the Justice Department and the Bureau did to attack the scourge of organized crime in the United States. And it's a very complicated prosecution, and they're very lengthy investigations, and they require a lot of coordination between the local district and main justice. And a lot of prosecutors and a lot of agents just didn't like that level of kind of oversight, if you will, or maybe engagement. And so it was difficult to bring a RICO indictment. And you probably got a whole host of investigators in the FBI that will never have that opportunity. And it was my first opportunity in the Bureau. And so, going to work on a case that ended up in three different trials in both federal and state court, and involved prosecutors that have now gone on to some pretty significant roles in the legal community. was awesome. It built the foundations for all my friendships in the bureau, and it was really I mean, I didn't work on a significant RICO case after that, and it was my first one out the door. I had the opportunity to brief the attorney general on mishandling investigations. I had an incident when I was working in Washington State where I was responding to a hijacking slash aircraft crash where there was only one person on the plane. I spent time in Guantanamo Bay doing detention operations, and one of the first times that I had an engagement with the Federal Security Service when I was in Russia. I went to Lubyanka, to the headquarters of the FSB, which is the old headquarters of the KGB, with the chief of station at the time, and met the general that was in charge of the counterintelligence arm of the FSB in Moscow. And so these are all, in and of themselves, are super super special things to be a part of, and to have the opportunity throughout my career to have a number of different memorable moments makes me a very fortunate public servant.
It's amazing. There's so much. I mean, you said so much there, but like just thinking about the stories you're telling about your family and the service that they did for the country, and then what you're doing. I mean, it really is amazing, and it's actually one of the things I love about doing this show is like getting things like this out there from people that actually were doing the work, not necessarily talking heads and stuff like that. So I really do appreciate you sharing those things. And so I want to ask you a hard question. Well, the first part may not be hard, but the second part will be. So what offices did you work at, and which was your favorite? I think I know, but I'll let you answer it.
All right. So I started in FBI New York. I went to Washington, D.C. to FBI headquarters. I went to Guantanamo Bay to the FBI operation there in the Joint Task Force. I went to San Diego. I went to U.S. Embassy in Moscow, Russia. I was in Seattle in a resident agency in Tacoma, Washington. Came back to New York City, went back to FBI headquarters, and then back to New York City. So I have had 10 moves, if my calculations are correct, in the FBI, and I have not had a bad assignment in the bureau. I've had some that have been more challenging than others, both either personally or professionally, but I have not had a bad assignment, and each one of them stood out for a different reason.
Mm-hmm.
But again, as you could probably imagine, that the ability to start my career in one of the most complicated investigations that anybody could be a part of, a RICO case in the Southern District of New York, arguably the most powerful and influential district in the country, and then to be able to finish my career in New York leading a team of investigators, analysts, and professional staff employees that are trying to counter the intelligence gathering efforts of our hostile adversaries that virtually no one else in the bureau is able to encounter because of the UN headquarters on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Like that, by and large, I think that my favorite office to work in has been slightly more than the others has been New York. I had a great experience on the Southwest border when I was in San Diego. I had a tremendous experience in the Seattle office running the Olympic Peninsula, basically, for all criminal investigations. And when you tell people that you went to both Cuba and Russia, it's a little hard to unpack. So.
You know what? I'm not gonna put you in that spot, but maybe another time we could discuss like who you think some of the who were your top criminals that you ever dealt with in your career? I'll open it up to you, but I won't hold you to it. We can discuss another time.
Who were the top criminals I had to
Yeah,
deal
like
with?
who are the baddest people that you like? You're talking about a lot of different things, and I'd just be curious, like from your perspective, who are the worst people that you dealt with, like during your career?
Wow. That
That's a
like,
tough.
look, I'll give you a category of people that are the
Yeah,
worst people that I've had to deal with, and they are anybody that's involved in the exploitation of children.
sure.
It I was on a violent crime squad in San Diego, and part of the violent crime program there was the Violent Crimes Against Children program.
Yeah,
And the people that work that in the FBI have seen things that nobody should ever have to that
uh,
should never have to see. And so that I would say, I've dealt with Albanian organized crime figures. I've dealt with serial bank robbers and murderers, and our nation's most lethal adversaries as far as counterintelligence and cyber, and there is nothing to compare to the evil behind somebody that would be involved in the crimes against children program. So in general, those folks are the ones that I would consider our greatest enemies.
sure. Thanks for, yeah, again, highlighting that, and I think that everyone would agree without even knowing the details of that. So we actually had Commissioner Bill Bratton on the previous episode, the last one, and interestingly, I don't think I've asked this question before, but I was actually just curious, and I thought his reaction was like fantastic. Like he appreciated me asking the question, but so I think I'm going to do that going forward, and you're part of that, and so. I wanted to hear a little bit because you got so far up within the bureau, right? And I think that journey of getting there and some of the people that helped you get there. Can you talk about some of your mentors?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that the you've got some of the finest people as far as character that are working in these government agencies, especially the law enforcement and intelligence services, that are giving up a significant financial or personal benefit on the outside to apply their skills and their trades on the inside, and they're doing so because their character is such that they believe that making all those sacrifices for the country is important. And the folks that I had the opportunity to deal with and work with in the FBI were some of the finest leaders that I have come across. The folks that listen to this show would probably recognize a bunch of the names, but if you talk about some of the leaders in our counterterrorism program over the years and in the national security program, like Jay Tab or Jill Sanborn, like fantastic insight into what is important and how to focus a limited number of resources and assets. JTAB is frankly when I as a line level employee, you're focused almost completely on yourself and tactics, and you're probably talking about 5% of your time you're thinking about strategic things, and then as you transpire into being an assistant special agent in charge at the GS-15 level, now you're starting to get into like the 50-50 realm, and then by the time you're an SAC, you're at 80-20, 90-10 strategic to tactical, and then somebody like Jay or Jill that is at the executive assistant director level, they're almost 98%, probably 100% of the time they're thinking about strategy. But it's disingenuous to think that you can just leave all of that other stuff behind. And so the lessons that you learn as you move through an organization and you take different roles, like they're never gonna leave you. And so the folks that in headquarters that would complain about field agents, and the field agents that would complain about headquarters people. Like, we're all the same. We're all special agents. We're all intelligence analysts. We're all professional staff employees that are just filling different roles and have different experiences. So, Jay was the special agent in charge of the Seattle office when I came out to be the supervisory senior resident agents in Tacoma. And so when I didn't know Jay at all, I just knew his reputation. I knew he had received a number of different awards for valor and bravery from the Bureau. And they had unsuccessfully on a number of different tactical operations and trying to blow him up and shoot him. And he had survived all that. And he basically told me, like, look, I need you to be the leader in Tacoma and the peninsula, because I can't do it. I can't do it everywhere. And so the amount of trust that he placed in me was really refreshing. And that was all based on the fact that he knew that if you did your due diligence and you hired the right person, you didn't have to second guess what they did operationally. And if they needed help, you could support them, but you didn't have to follow behind them. And the great example of that was in that instance I had kind of brushed over, where we had a plane crash, which was the result of a hijacking, and it was just one person. Like, he did not come down into my territory to deal with that. He knew that I had it in hand. He knew that I would go through the folks that I needed to get access to and get support. And he dealt with the big strategic level stuff in Seattle with the press and with the outside agencies. So, like, Jay and Jill were two of the folks that I dealt with on the counterterrorism side and in leadership roles that really empowered their employees, which is, a really important thing. But then support for folks and having a character and a presence when you're in the room is also very important. You talk about guys like Jim Dennehy, who runs the office in New York right now, and the character that he has demonstrated through his career coming out of the United States Marine Corps. And when he walks in a room, you think that he appears like an FBI agent appears. He appears to have a presence that really commands the room. I've had the opportunity to work with some near peers as well. Kurt Ronau is one of my closest friends and confidants, and he was my peer when I was in New York. He was the special agent in charge in the Washington field office. Jesse Levine was another New Yorker that I worked with. And, I think a lot of times when people think about mentors, you think about somebody that is well far in advance of you, and they are 5 steps ahead of you in your career, and they really have this huge book of knowledge to impart on you. But if you really think about it, anybody that is a valued, trusted advisor is really what a mentor is. And so, I would say that one of the people that has mentored me along the way the most in my career is my wife. And she is a retired naval officer and has given me advice from the outside, from the standpoint of another public servant, from somebody outside the department, and then frankly from just from her experience as how she sees things as a mother and a private citizen. Like, it's really been invaluable to have these sort of people in my life to kind of give me feedback, to give me their opinion of things, to give me their opinion of me, and to do so in a safe space. And so, these are all great examples of mentors that I've had in my career.
Eric, I got to tell you, I love how you answered that question. Again, different people take things differently and answer it the way that's appropriate to them. But I love that you spent that time talking about all those people, and I'm sure they'll appreciate it if they listen to it. So thank you for that. So we've talked about the good guys. Now let's transition onto the topic of the show, which is nation state adversaries. And the topic was inspired by many, many things, right? So we, Integris, we're privileged to work with organizations that have interests throughout the globe, right? And it seems as though the threat landscape just keeps getting more and more sophisticated. Bad actors are playing both the short game and the long game. And there are external threats, obviously, but then there's the internal ones that are brewing for everyone, right? So, um, while this isn't a concern for like everyone, I think it's safe to say that nation state adversaries are some of the most difficult to deal with for those that are dealing with the issue. So we thought it would make sense to have you join us, Eric, to address questions that we know are on people's minds. So um, perhaps we could start by defining the term insider threat. Could you talk about that a little bit for me?
Yeah, like, look, it's really an oversimplification, but it's just a risk, right? It's a security risk that comes from inside your organization, no matter how big or how small, right? It typically involves a person, right? It's an employee, it's a contractor, it's one of your business partners, it's anybody that has access to your organization's data. It has access to your systems, your premises, and then there's the threat is that there's going to be some harm associated with that, and that's either intentional or unintentional, right? So you have you have both malicious and non-malicious insiders. You've got those folks that intentionally try to steal or sabotage or leak data for some personal gain or to inflict damage on the organization. And then on the other side, you have the non-malicious folks that are either they're just negligent, or through some sort of negligence or a mistake, they have become compromised. And so, if you have an employee who repeatedly falls for phishing attacks, or mishandles information, or loses laptops, those folks are putting your organization at risk through their negligence. And then you have the folks that get compromised, and a lot of this is generally it's more prevalent, you think, in the cyberspace, in that um, they get their credentials hijacked or their access hijacked, and so there's unauthorized access to systems or data that is not intentional. And all of this is really kind of laid out by the fact that all of these threats are particularly dangerous because insiders already have some sort of legitimate access to these
Sure.
things, whether it's your building, your computer, your data. It makes their actions harder to detect compared to an external cyber hack. And so there's a whole host of ways you can kind of mitigate these risks and assess them, but that's what makes this so difficult, is the fact that these risks are all associated with at least some level of legitimate, authentic access.
Sure, sure. And we'll talk about how that relates to nation states as we continue. But just to kind of help set the table, and to the extent that you can discuss it, can you talk a little bit about the evolution of your career as it relates to nation state concerns?
Yeah. So um, if you look at it, I started out kind of not really a nation state concern, but I'm dealing with a foreign group. The Albanian organized crime
Yep.
kind of issue in New York City was based on the geopolitical realization of what happened after the fall of Yugoslavia and all the fallout from that. And so also in talking how I grew in my career from tactically thinking to strategic thinking, you realize how much in some of these countries that we're going to talk about, how much the criminal aspect is co-opted by the nation state. And so the idea that we are dealing with criminal organizations that just exist in the United States, and they have no touch outside the United States, is really less prevalent now than transnational actors, in which you have, anything from, multinational cartels to, nation states that are co-opting different nationality criminal organizations to do things inside the United States. It really has broadened. The fact that travel is so much easier now, communication is so much easier now. The economies of these nations are intertwined. The ability to move cryptocurrency across the world without pesky borders interfering with it, like all of this has made a nation state player much more critical than 100 years ago.
Sure. So, you mentioned Jim Dennehy. He was actually on in December, last episode of last year, and he talked a little bit about this. But what countries concern you the most?
I think the ones that concern me the most are the ones that everybody would think, the big four, right? China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. The White House just came out recently with the America First investment executive order or policy, and it talks also about countries like specifically names Cuba and Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
These are the big ones. The big four are the ones that by far are I think the biggest issue that we need to face. And anybody that talks about nation state actors is going to talk about China by and away as the pacing threat that we face in this country.
Sure. So, what industries do you think are the biggest target? I know that's a little bit of an open-ended, broad question, but to the extent that you could address that.
Yeah, no. So I think that you see, tech is very important, right? So I think that if you're working in quantum, if you're working in AI, if you are doing anything in semiconductors or biopharma, these are very very interesting to everyone, especially China, right? I think that I think that a big target more in the disruption area would be our critical infrastructure. I was at the National Defense Industrial Association's Special Operations Conference in Washington, D.C. last week, and the Special Operations Commander, General Fenton, had been talking about how in our modern age we have we generally understand that there is mutually assured destruction in the nuclear warfare area.
Mm-hmm.
We have gotten to the stage now where conventionally a fight between the United States and Russia, a fight between the United States and China would be almost nearly as destructive. And so there's not a desire for a great power conventional conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a lot of irregular warfare out there. And when you start talking about the risk that's posed in these kind of gray zones adjacent to actual kinetic activity, the ability of our adversaries to negatively impact our critical infrastructure, whether that be power generation or distribution of water in the United States, is concerning.
Yeah. So, again, a tough question, right? What is your feeling on those different sort of sectors that you just discussed? Do you feel like, in general, people are taking it seriously enough?
I think that people are taking it seriously enough, and I think that they are looking at it in different ways. And it's different outlooks on what they think is going to be most safe and most secure. So you don't have in speaking about the private sector, if you have a company out there that is selling something or has intellectual property, at no point do they think, well, it's acceptable for someone to steal this from us.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get big enough, there is acceptable loss, right? It's a ledger issue. It's if we lose 0.1% from this one particular business, and it's going to cost us 25% to to prevent that loss. It doesn't make sense to do that. So what I will say on that is that there are certain industries in which there can be a feeling that if we just run fast enough, if we get there ahead of an adversary like China, we can shortchange ourselves in the short term on security, right? Like the flames are not going to catch me if I'm running fast enough. And that is something that is yet to be borne out, right? I think that when you're looking at some smaller companies that may not have the capital and they may not have the revenue, they may not have the backing to really have a robust security program or a robust insider threat program. They feel like if they go fast enough and they get big enough, that then eventually they're going to be able to do that, and they're going to kind of outrun their adversaries and outrun their competitors. I don't necessarily know if that's the best course of action, but that'll be borne out, on the books for those particular companies.
Sure. Yeah, and we'll talk about an insider threat program a little bit later, but I was hoping again, going back to the idea of investigation insiders, are you able to share a case study during your time at the FBI of insider threat caused by a nation state, whether specifically or generally?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these, unfortunately, are cases that have already been adjudicated, and the companies have suffered, significant losses. But I think that I think anybody can Google the case of Sinovel and an American superconductor, right? So at this point, it's probably 20 years ago, 19 years ago. Um, you know, American Superconductor is in a business relationship with Sinovel, a Chinese wind turbine manufacturer. And in addition to doing wind turbine design and engineering services, the U.S. company is providing the Chinese company with proprietary equipment and software that regulates the flow of electricity between the turbines, the physical turbines, and the grids. And for many, many years, this was an extremely profitable relationship for the U.S. company. And the Chinese company really benefited greatly as well. And it became basically the largest, if I'm not mistaken, the largest wind turbine manufacturer in the PRC and the second largest in the world. And then all of a sudden, it fell apart overnight. The U.S. company AMSC had somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 million in contracts. And the Chinese company simply shut off the pipeline immediately overnight. And the impact to that company in the U.S., they had seen the profitability of it, and like 80% of their business was involved with Sinovel, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 600. I think more along the lines of like 500 of their 700 employees lost their jobs within 2 years. They lost like $800 million. And all of that was a result of an insider threat, a person inside the U.S. company in a subsidiary overseas that for a variety of different reasons basically took sensitive material, proprietary information from the U.S. company, passed it to the Chinese company, and it basically crippled the U.S. company. It's an example of a pretty terrible loss.
Yep. And look, that's obviously a pretty extreme example, but there's a lot between that and there's a lot less that could happen that could be very terrible also. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a collapse of your stock price. If you lose market share, if you lose, you have some patented technology, or you've got some proprietary IP that another company gets ahead of, and you lose access to the Chinese market. Those are all pretty damaging for U.S. businesses, and especially for U.S. innovation.
Absolutely. So again, we started this part of the discussion talking about insider threat. We just discussed it again. Can you talk, I guess, about what the major components, in your opinion, of an insider threat program are?
Yeah. So, it's depending on the size of your company, it's going to be a little bit different, right? But basically, you have to have certain things in place that are going to make your program effective, right? You have to have, at the top of this, you have to have leadership, right? You have to have leadership, and you have to have governance over your program. You have to have executive buy-in so that this works across all of the departments in your organization. HR, IT, your security department, your legal department, all of these sorts of areas. You have to have also, you have to have legal and compliance considerations with regard to how you monitor your employees, how you vet your employees, how you investigate employees, how you enforce different rules. Are you in compliance with the variety of U.S. and international data protection laws, those sorts of things. So you have to have some structure over top of the whole program, right? Leadership, governance, policies, legal compliance, that sort of stuff. But then you also have to have a system by which you actually can identify risk, and you can assess risk. You can pull in information both from across all of your work centers and all your business entities inside a company, as well as information from outside the company that's available for you to assess really your risk of certain loss. And then there's some things that you need to do around how to kind of control that risk inside, right? You have standards by which you monitor folks that are using your systems. So you have to be able to look at your network activity and how people are accessing files and how they're communicating. And then you generally have to have some sort of analytics to detect any sort of anomalies in your baseline to figure out when you need to enact certain protocols to handle these sorts of things. So you're monitoring your users, you're monitoring behavior on your networks, and then you also have to kind of control your networks and you control your access. And so most organizations have some sort of role-based access that you're limited to certain data depending on your job function. You're using good cyber hygiene, multi-factor authentication. You have any number of different control factors so that you're not just opening up all of the information your organization has to people that don't necessarily have a need to use it. You have to have a way to respond to these sort of incidents as well. So you have to have some sort of investigative arm. You have to have some sort of incident response where there's procedures that are set that work across, again, a lot of different entities within your organization, whether that be your IT department and HR. You have to have a way to actually work across the entire organization, or it's really not going to be as effective as you want. And then all of these procedures in place that you have to have some sort of testing and evaluation of them to make sure they are still meeting your needs. So penetration testing, phishing emails that your department sends out, your IT department, and then you make improvements as you scale. The same sort of insider threat program for a company that's 50 people is not going to be the same as for 5,000. And then the last thing I would say is you have to have some sort of widespread awareness in the company and training, right? You have to have this is the insider threat program, cybersecurity, all of these security type programs are not limited to those departments. So if the only people in your company that are thinking about cybersecurity is your cybersecurity team, you're going to have problems. So that's why when you start from the top with leadership buy-in across the organization, whether at the something like the corporate group or the individual companies or the work centers, if the leaders are bought into it and the leaders build and believe in a robust insider threat program, that's going to build the culture. And so each individual employee, whether that's the person that sits at the front desk and badges people in, to the scientist that's working on the most proprietary, secret, innovative technology that the company has. They all feel equally as empowered to protect the company from any sort of loss or any sort of negative interaction.
Eric, that was a fantastic summary, and I love the way that you ended it, because, again, a lot of times the biggest vulnerabilities do lie with people, right? And that awareness, that training that you talk about, really could be the difference between, again, as you mentioned, not everything is necessarily malicious, right? It could be just unwitting mistake by an individual. So thank you so much for that whole synopsis. I mean, I think that was fantastic. So just again, we had a chance to attend a function that was provided by Eric's company, Strider Technologies, but then we actually had a follow-up demo, and that really is the part of the synthesis of this discussion here. Can you talk a little bit, Eric, about like what Strider is doing to help organizations fight this battle, and offer any sort of case studies that you might be able to share?
Yeah, sure. I would like to go back just a minute on the previous question, something that you highlighted.
Yeah.
And we talked about this right from the get-go, right? Like insider threats, generally speaking, almost exclusively are focused on people, right? And so this is perhaps one of the most tricky areas. It's the flip side of the same coin. Am I going to give this person more training and make them more aware of how to protect themselves, or do I need to be investigating them, right? Because if you go to your workforce and say, the main issue that we have here with security, the weakest link in this chain are the people, that is a terrible message to send to your workforce.
Right.
However, on the other hand, it is somewhat true that the way that there's only one group that's intentionally trying to do this. There's a whole host of different groups that, through a variety of different things, make mistakes or errors in which they kind of let things happen. So it's all focused really culturally and on people.
Definitely.
And so if you have the ability to message that to the workforce, like, you're not the weakest link, but you are exposed to the most pressure, you're exposed to the most stress, we're going to make you the strongest link in protecting our IP and protecting our talent. That's really, I think, what you want to message to your workforce, right? Again, it all comes down to leadership and culture. And so what Strider has done is positioned itself as a strategic intelligence company, which does a couple of different things that enables a company to make an informed risk decision, right? We take publicly available information and we transform that into strategic intelligence. And it allows an organization to secure people, to secure technology and organizational relationships as the world and the geopolitics of international business really kind of blows up, right? So we collect publicly available data from around the world, and we apply proprietary, cutting-edge artificial intelligence solutions and proprietary methodologies to make strategic intelligence available to folks. The company is filled with experts. The company is filled with former intelligence community experts. The company is filled with native language speakers from those countries that we discussed earlier, Russia, China. I don't think we have anyone from North Korea that works for us, but the expertise is there. And the folks that we help are really across the board. Anybody that has any sort of technology of interest to China really should be consider becoming a client if they're not already. We have 8 of the top 10 Fortune companies. We have companies across the oil and gas sector, semiconductors, manufacturing, aero defense, biotech, and pharma. And then we have a government program where we have relationships with some DoD folks and the Department of State, Department of Energy, and then we work outside the intelligence community, and we do have some external partnerships with the Five Eye countries. We do not have any foreign ownership in the company, and we have a really growing workforce that is passionate and talented and really very savvy when it comes to understanding exactly how to protect people and how to protect technology, and has a really deep understanding of the TTPs and the culture of some of our foreign adversaries. So it really is. It has been a fantastic. It's been a fantastic jump for me to step from a role, a very similar role in what I was doing in the government, to the mission oriented culture that we have here at Strider. It really is. It's really been fantastic. And if you think about the scope of the loss that we have been facing in the United States, I think the U.S. Trade Representative said that it's somewhere between like $250 and $600 billion in intellectual property annually is stolen from the United States. So to overemphasize the threat posed by China specifically and taking our talent and our technology, it really is far and away the pacing threat that we're faced, the pacing threat that we are facing in this industry now.
Eric, I really appreciate you going through that, and we will put Strider's information as well as Eric's in the description of the podcast. Eric, I can't thank you enough for jumping on this episode with me. I think that the listeners are going to find it very fascinating and helpful. And hopefully, some folks reach out to you and seek your help in kind of combating what is clearly a very, very serious concern for quite a few organizations. So thank you so much for joining me, Eric.
You are welcome. I look forward to running into you in the city sometime soon.
Absolutely. And for everyone, thank you for your support and listening and your comments. We can't express our gratitude enough. Thank you.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.